Good morning. Good morning. There you go. Thank you for joining us today for the second in our panel discussion series, DEA, Who We Are and What We Do. I'm Lori Beatty, and I'm the director of the DEA Museum here at headquarters. Our panel today represents the DEA's Office of Forensic Sciences with a mission to provide quality, scientific, technical, and administrative support to the law enforcement and intelligence communities and to the criminal justice system at large to assist with the enforcement of controlled substance laws and regulations of the United States. There are three different disciplines within the Forensic Sciences Division: chemistry, fingerprints, and digital evidence. Today's panelists represent all three disciplines. Jonathan Duffy is a forensic chemist at the DEA Mid-Atlantic Laboratory, where, in addition to other responsibilities, he analyzes exhibits. And I thought, ooh, he comes to the museum and analyzes our exhibits, but no. He analyzes exhibits for court cases for the presence of controlled substances. Digital evidence examiner Jill Mossman has worked with almost every type of electronic storage device possible. She's testing that one. And Anna Zato is a senior fingerprint specialist with the DEA. Before joining DEA, she was a crime scene investigator. The panel moderator, Elizabeth Maurer, is our curator of education at the museum. Today's panel will spend the next 30 minutes or so discussing the Office of Forensic Sciences, including its mission, their roles, training, and other topics. At the end, we will open the floor to questions both from people here in the auditorium as well as those watching the live stream. If you're watching the live stream, please place your email questions to the email address on the deamuseum.org homepage. I'll remind you this at the end of the program. Liz.
Hello. Thank you, Lori. I'm very happy to see that we have great turnout here in person today and saying hello to the folks who are watching us online. And I think it would be wonderful if we started off with, since the theme of this series is who we are and what we do, if you could, one by one, tell us who you are and what you do for DEA. And let's start with Jill.
Hi, my name is Jill Mossman. I'm a senior digital evidence examiner. I've been with DEA for about 14 years. My job is to image, archive, and analyze all forms of digital media, which basically means I need to be able to create forensically sound copies of everything from DVRs with surveillance camera footage, servers with pharmaceutical databases, GPS units recovered from boats, cell phones, drones, and any sort of external hard drive.
And we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the different kinds of evidence that you can find on these devices. So let's go to Anna next.
Good morning. My name is Anna Zato, and I am a senior fingerprint specialist with the DEA in the Southeast Lab, which is located in Miami, Florida. I've been with DEA approximately 17 years now. And are we going into what we do?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. To describe what I do on a daily basis as a senior fingerprint specialist, normally I analyze evidence that has been separated from the drugs, usually by the forensic chemist, which would be Jonathan. And so after he separates it and he puts it back into the vault for me. I take that out of the vault and I open that in order to analyze it for fingerprints per the request of the submitting officer. Once that is done, after I find the fingerprints, they will document the fingerprints and preserve them with photography. I will also enter them into a database. I can compare the subjects that the officer has submitted to see if they're identified to that particular subject. If they are not identified to that subject, they will then go into another database, which is the FBI's NGI database, which they're searched for both civilian and criminal databases. After that's completed, and if there's an identification there, the report is written, and the report's written, And we also testify in court to those results when we're called upon to do so. And last but not least, we also respond to drug investigations outside of the laboratory per request of the agents.
So it's a very complicated process, but with very definite steps along the way.
Yes, we have many steps along the way.
I think it's important, right? And then Jonathan, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Jonathan Duffy. I am a forensic chemist at the DEA Mid-Atlantic Laboratory in Largo, Maryland. As a forensic chemist, my primary duties are to use a variety of analytical techniques and chemical instrumentation to analyze evidence for the presence of controlled substances. I get called upon to court to provide expert witness testimony on my conclusions, and I also provide technical assistance to law enforcement, such as with presumptive testing, training, or clandestine laboratory seizures.
Right. So now, Jonathan, about how many offices does DEA have for your specialty or your particular branch, and off the top of your head where they're located?
So the DEA has 7 field offices or laboratories for chemistry. We have New York, DC, Miami, Dallas, Chicago, San Francisco, and San Diego. We also have a special testing and research laboratory in Virginia and a satellite laboratory in Nashville.
Then Anna, your specialty has a variety of offices as well?
That's correct. We have just the 7. So the 7 field laboratories all have a fingerprint specialist within the laboratory.
And what about digital?
For digital, our primary lab is located in Virginia, but we also have satellite offices located in New York, Chicago, Houston, and San Diego and Utah. But unlike the chemistry lab, our satellite offices are much smaller and only 2 to 3 people per office.
Oh, okay. So it seems like also the ability to work as a team, like using technology across the country and communications, is probably very important when you're working on cases.
Yes.
Okay. I always find it really interesting to know people's backstory. Like, how did you find out about this field? How did you come into this field? If you can tell me a little bit, let's start with Anna. If you can tell us a little bit about your story and how you decided that you wanted to be a fingerprint specialist. Yeah.
Well, my story starts really at Michigan State University in the year of 1989. I went to Michigan State and thinking I was going to be a chemist. I had chemistry on my mind, I had biology on my mind, but I did not understand what I was going to do once I graduated with these degrees. So I did get a little frustrated during I think it was my junior year, went to a counselor and said, I need help figuring out what I'm going to do with my life. This is before OJ, okay, so that's it. Well, but it's an interesting time period because it's 1989, 90, and she said, well, we have this program called forensic science. And I said, okay, never heard of it. And she said it has law classes and it also has the science classes, and every single class that you have is going to transfer over into the program. And I said, well, that sounds pretty interesting because it had a bunch of law classes to go along with it. And I said, that sounds like something I'm going to be interested in. I switched over and graduated with the forensic science degree. Then I had to try to find a job. So personal life got in the way eventually, though I do beg my way into being a crime scene investigator for a police department in Texas. My personal life went from Michigan to Texas, so I had to find a job doing that. And I said, I didn't go to school to do crime scene. I went to school to be a chemist. But life takes you in different ways, so I became the crime scene investigator. I did that for 8.5 years. With that said, crime scene involves fingerprints. So I resisted fingerprints for a little bit, and I said I still am a chemist. But I somehow enjoyed learning how to do fingerprints, and with that said, became a certified latent print examiner as well as a certified crime scene investigator. my goal was always to become part of the DEA. Even back before I was here, my goal was to eventually get with DEA after I became certified, which is what one of the requirements is for DEA to be a fingerprint specialist. I pursued it and was fortunate enough to go from Texas right into the Dallas laboratory back in 2002 is when I was hired. And I transferred over to Miami later on in 2006, where that's where I've been ever since. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful path.
So it seems like life experience is really important, and that it's taking you from this experience to where you are coming in today, right? And I'm gonna go to Jonathan next, because I think that you have the least experience at DEA. So some of what you talk about could be also relevant to our streaming audience that might be like looking for a major in college right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention I've been at DEA almost 4 years. So where my career began, I was an undergraduate student at Penn State University, and I was undecided. And you kind of pick a few majors that you might be interested in. None of the ones that I picked were chemistry or forensics, but I thought I would be interested in architecture at the time because I thought I would like building things and designing them. And I took a chemistry class as a prerequisite, and I really liked it. It was a little challenging, and I liked being in the laboratory. So I started to take more chemistry classes. So I took organic chemistry and analytical chemistry, and I think what I realized was there's kind of building in architecture and chemistry. I kind of liked looking at molecules and using instruments to kind of work backwards and determine unknown structures, stuff like that. And I also wasn't very artistic to do architecture in the long run. So I liked it. It was a little more abstract. And so I worked part-time at the police station, where I worked as an evidence technician. And they also taught me how to process some stolen items for fingerprints, stuff like that. Once I graduated, I moved to this area, and I did some work with contract work, either doing fingerprints or consulting, and I started going to grad school at GW part-time. And during that process, I got hired at the DEA.
So would you say that instead of building things, you're now taking them apart?
Right, definitely.
Okay.
Especially our instruments, too.
Okay. All right, and Jill, tell us how you became interested and how you came into DEA.
Well, so I think our lab is a little unique in that we have a lot of examiners that have different backgrounds. So we have some examiners that come from the law enforcement background. They're former police officers. They gain their experience through being the only forensic examiner in the police force. And then we have some examiners that come from the military background. They gain their background working with various electronic components in the military. My background, though, is academic. When I was in college, my last thing that I wanted to do was chemistry. But I did want to get a job. That was my goal. So I had an undergraduate degree in computer information systems because that's where everybody seemed to be getting the work at. And I was working as an IT consultant in DC, and I had started my master's degree in IT security. At the same time that I had started the program there, they were starting the computer forensics program. And I thought, that looks kind of interesting. Looks pretty neat in the movies, so, and it seems a little more technical than IT security. So I thought, well, hey, I'll give this a try. So while I was working on my major, I had an opportunity to work with the DEA, and so I took it and ran with it, and here I am.
Hey, that's, I always think of like the movies where the digital forensic specialists are sitting down at a laptop and touching two keys, and then all of a sudden all of the information in the world pops up on the screen like over their head. And without giving anything away, I suspect that's not really the way it happens, right?
Well, I don't want to give away all the secrets.
Right, okay. But you do go to crime scenes, don't you?
Yes. So our lab is called to go to assist with search warrants several times a month. So our part, when they execute the search warrant, we will be almost immediately after they secure the scene, we will go in to make sure that the electronic media is safe and preserved, and that none of the employees or homeowners are able to make any changes to their electronics.
And as a crime scene investigator, you have been to many, many, many crime scenes in different capacities, but you're still going to crime scenes as a fingerprint specialist? Yeah.
It has
Yeah.
changed within the last couple of years. The shift was clandestine laboratories, usually with the making of meth, but it has shifted to now the fentanyl has kind of taken over the lab sites, and so we don't go to as many as we used to go to, but we still can respond for multiple reasons, yes.
All right. And then what about you, Jonathan?
So the chemists at our laboratory, we rotate a schedule to be the chemist on duty. So if there's a clandestine laboratory seizure, we'll have chemists sent to assist the agents. And that could be with helping figure out what kind of clan lab they're dealing with. It could be with safety, taking measurements, determining what evidence to bring back to the laboratory, and what to go to hazardous waste.
Now, when we have visitors to the museum, particularly teenagers, and they always want to know about the suits.
Right, yeah. Actually, when we go to give talks in high schools and stuff, we usually bring a suit.
You bring a
Yeah.
suit, right?
They're hot
They're hot. Oh,
on the inside.
oh. So, but I think that's what people think of sometimes.
Yep.
So you've worn the suit?
Yep, and actually the training is in Los Angeles, so when I got trained, it was in the middle of the summer
Yes.
in July, and I was wearing the suit. So I wore a ton of ice cold towels like all around myself
Okay.
inside the suit. But I also do a lot of hot yoga, so it wasn't too bad.
Okay, so that's your out of office training and
Yeah.
preparation is hot yoga. Wow. You know, I'm really curious as to, since you have labs across the country and you have people in the labs with you, is how are people assigned to cases, or how, or to analyze exhibits? Like, so how does that arrive at your bench or your desk? Let me start with Jonathan again.
Okay, so I'll look on my computer on our laboratory information management system and see something was assigned to me by my supervisor. I'd go pick it up, analyze it. But the way in which it's assigned, and when I first started working, I'd kind of work a case from exhibit 1 through 50. The way we do it now is we kind of became more efficient with organizing the suspected drug. And so the chemists will analyze a certain type of suspected drug for, say, 6 weeks. So I can be assigned the methamphetamine exhibits or cocaine or heroin, and I'll pretty much analyze those type of suspected exhibits for about 6 weeks. And in a way, it makes things more efficient because I kind of have everything I need to do that analysis, and I can work through all of them. Whereas before, if I was jumping back and forth through different categories, I kind of would have to change my mindset and what instruments I'm using.
So it sounds like it's really become a much more streamlined, efficient process.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Does it work the same way in the fingerprint lab, or does it work a little bit differently when you're assigned an exhibit?
It's a little different. I mean, you know, again, John, the chemists are separating most of our evidence, so we're kind of relying on them to get our fingerprint requests through them. So once they're done and completed, then we can go get it from the vault also. But it's assigned by the supervisor as well, and we're usually working with court rushes if there's something for court, if somebody needs something, or whatever priority an agent might have in order to establish for, you know, any sort of grand jury, whatnot. So after the supervisor assigns it, then we're going to go get it just like John does too, and we're going to work it as we would normally do to meet whatever needs that we have.
Right. All right. Now, am I remembering correctly that in digital forensics that people are developing specialties in particular kinds of devices?
Yes, so we are all expected to have a general knowledge about how to image all the different electronic devices. And so when we go out on site and assist with the search warrant executions, we can all image pretty much anything that we see. But then once we get it back to the lab, we'll review it and determine what specialty it will go to. Like for instance, I do cell phones is my specialty. So when we get a cell phone that comes in, they'll know to send it my way. If there's a damaged hard drive, it'll go to a different group. If there's a DVR with the surveillance camera footage, it'll go to a different group. But all of the groups work together because sometimes we'll have a computer with passwords that we'll need to use to unlock a cell phone. So although we work in different specialties, we still all work together.
Right. Well, I'm wondering what happens to the evidence after it's been examined?
So it depends on the state of the exhibit. Most of the time when we're done, we repackage the evidence and we'll return it to the office that it came from. We don't store the evidence at our primary lab. But then we have instances where we have cell phones that we can't break into. And sometimes that means we have to take them apart. So they will get their cell phone back in a baggie in pieces.
Oh. Right. Well, so I'm assuming you can't give back a fingerprint.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
But the drug evidence that's been collected, what happens to that at the end?
That's another one where they don't get it back. Depending on if it's a DEA case, we store it. If it's non-DEA, we give it back to that agency for storage. And generally, it stays in storage for a long time. If it's needed for court, they'll pull it from storage. And eventually, when the case is closed, after so many years, it is destroyed.
Okay. Well, speaking of court and court cases, like you get called to court quite frequently, don't you?
Right.
Yeah.
I would say as a chemist, I probably receive a subpoena for court at least every other week. But that doesn't necessarily mean I go to court. But I would say the most stressful part of court is making the travel arrangements. When you have a lot of subpoenas and you have to go to a lot of different states, just getting all the travel down. We actually usually have a lot of chemists going to the same trial. And in this area, there's a few different airports. So we're always trying to figure out, are we sharing a car? What time are we flying in? What hotel are we all staying in? That kind of stuff. So just parking, all that stuff, that's the most stressful part. One time I was driving for court in DC and I couldn't find a parking spot, and I found a little parking spot and I couldn't fit in it, and I was just getting so stressed out. But once you get to court, we have so much training and practice that the actual testimony, for me, it's not as bad.
And I think you probably have had some similar experiences in going to court repeatedly. And I know that Jill has a way of describing what she does when she comes to court, so it's very clear.
Well, a lot of times, sometimes the reports that we use are used for intel, so they never make it to the prosecution state. And then sometimes the information that we use is used to make plea bargain agreements with the suspect. So I go to court about once to twice a year. So it really depends on how far along they get in the prosecution stage of it.
Of the case. And so, Anna, when you've gone to court, do you find you have to talk to a jury sometimes? And is there a particular way that you've learned over time to describe what you do in a way that a regular person who's not a specialist can understand it?
Yes, interestingly enough, the prosecutor wants you to explain things because of the CSI effect. So people have watched TV, and we're in there to sort of dispel you can't just find fingerprints on everything at all times. So we're usually in there, and normally we do testify, I would have to say 50% of the time, and I only go twice a year. So, okay, 50% of the time it's usually on no latent prints developed. We're in there explaining how fingerprints were not found on the actual drug evidence itself. And that is because people do think that you find fingerprints no matter what. And so we're in there and trying to explain why we did not find fingerprints on the drug evidence.
So the jury learned something.
The jury
at the
does.
end.
The jury does learn something, I believe, through explaining the process and explaining that the drugs are contaminants, and then it does cause problems when leaving fingerprints behind also.
See, one of the things I find interesting about what you said was that this whole CSI effect is only dates to the beginning of that television show, which, okay, has been around a really long time now. But it's one of those factors that you have to be aware of in a job that I think has been probably changing some over time, particularly with technology or skills and experience. And I'm wondering how you have found your job has changed since you started, or if it's become easier or harder. Yeah.
The job, I think, has become more transparent. So there's a lot more documentation because of the transparency through the court system and through reports that have been conducted outside of our agency itself. Just forensic science in general has become transparent. People want to know exactly what you did and how you did it, the thought process behind it. So the documentation has increased, which then does slow you down. But just like anything else, those changes just become a norm for an everyday, casework. So yes, it's become more documentation, which you think, okay, takes more time, but in the end, you do adjust to those changes, and it does. You feel that there is actually value in what you are providing as part of the transparency of forensic science.
So interesting. And I think technology must play a role too, because technology is constantly changing. And I know that Jill both uses technology in her job to analyze the technology that is her job.
Yes, I think it's ongoing and constant, and part of what is so exciting about my job is that everything is constantly changing. When I started working in forensics, we used to boot a computer with a floppy disk, and everyone had flip phones. And here we are several years later, and everyone has smartphones, and we have computers with no hard drives, and so you have to constantly catch up and become aware of what's changing, and how do you address these changes and still produce information that an agent can use in a viable form.
So, and technology, like you use technology all day long. So is it helping you? Is it still changing?
Right. I'd have to agree that technology definitely helps. Going from paper lab reports to digital lab reports, taking our notes on software instead of writing it down. Also with the types of instrumentation that we use, get refreshed every so many years, and the instrumentation becomes more sensitive, more rugged, lower limits of detection, so that always helps with analysis. But I will say technology on the opposite end for people that are creating new types of synthetic drugs also improves, because we'll continuously see new types of drugs.
Oh, so it's almost a spiraling effect of you do this and they do that, and now we have to do this and then they do that. So it's becoming more complex as you become kind of better or more proficient at what you're doing. Well, with what you're doing, you're in a field, because of the CSI effect, I think, that is hugely interesting to a lot of people, right, as a future career path. And in preparing for this particular panel today, my email address is the one that's on the publicity, and I was getting emails from people who were saying, so if I wanted to join this career field, what would I need to do in order to be able to do that? So I know that we have folks who are part of our streaming audience who are very interested in, first, like what you do and how you became qualified to do it, but then how that would translate into then securing a job with DEA. So that's my preparation question for the next one, which is, if you were giving advice, Jonathan, to somebody, like what kind of people or qualities do you think people should have to be successful as a forensic chemist?
So I'd say the first thing you'd want to decide is understanding the difference between a chemist and a forensic chemist, and if you want to go the route of being a forensic chemist. And it's the same thing if you want to be a toxicologist versus a forensic toxicologist. And really, the major difference is that you have to be able to communicate your results more, whether that be in court or with agents and stuff like that. So it's definitely like a laboratory type job where you work a lot independently and there's a lot of science, but there's an aspect of forensics where you have to be able to be an effective communicator.
Now, you have a master's degree. Would you say that they need a master's degree to come to DEA?
Well, I would say to look at the USA Jobs posting and look at the qualifications needed. For forensic chemists, they hire a range of grades, and they don't necessarily all have the same requirements. So I would say it's not necessary, but you'd have to look at the specific posting.
Okay. And I noticed you said earlier that when you were in college, you had a side job, a college job that was in a police department. So how important is it in putting together those kinds of skills before you even get to the end of your degree or to the end of your master's degree?
Yeah, I'd say some sort of part-time job or some sort of laboratory work, just experience being in a laboratory. And that's also great for yourself to know if that's what you want to do for the rest of your life, being in a laboratory. I also did an internship a postgrad internship in a toxicology lab. And that was important to me because I learned I never want to deal with body fluids ever again. So it's great to get different experience in different areas of forensic science and learn what's good for you.
Okay. So Anna, what kinds of skills or abilities or personality traits should somebody have to be successful as a fingerprint?
So fingerprints, you can't go to school to become a fingerprint specialist, right? And if I had to give advice, I would have to say what I did, forensic science, did pigeonhole me into forensic science. So it's chemistry that everybody understands. That you go to a job interview and you say, okay, I have a forensic science degree. What does that mean? Back in my day, what did that mean to anybody? But people understand it now. However, how many jobs are forensic science jobs? How many are out there? And if you have a chemistry degree or a different degree that everybody understands, you can get, if you have trouble getting a job as a forensic scientist, then you can use the chemistry to get a chemistry degree or a chemistry job. And you kind of diversify yourself. John also mentioned, there's a forensic part of the job and then there's the non-forensic part. So, but you give yourself options if you do not forensic science yourself so much. That's to begin with. As far as being a crime scene investigator or a latent print examiner, you have to be, you have to adapt. Things don't always go right. The weather can be a problem if you're outdoors. The time of day can be a problem. You have to work a lot by yourself. You have to make decisions on your own, and it's a challenge. But if you like to be on your own and work, I'll find fingerprints. It's a great job. It's a great job with the DEA.
It's wonderful. And I'm going to say, what kind of qualities should somebody who's thinking about digital forensic have?
So I came in with an academic background, and I think it's good to have a technology background academically because you're going to work with things like databases and programming. You might be working with databases and you're going to have to rebuild a pharmaceutical database that you've never seen before, or you're going to run into different apps on phones that you've never seen before. And you're going to have to be able to rebuild those databases in order to show an agent that this person was in this city at this hotel at this time. And then it's helpful to have a scripting background, which you can get through academia, because you can write programs where you sort out certain files that you're looking for that you can then pass on to the agent. But if you don't have an academic background, getting an IT background through other means, like through the military, like through the police, is also a good way to gain the background in that way. There are IT forensic certifications that are great to have too, that establish that you have the credentials, that when you apply for a job with DEA or any federal agency, that you know what you're talking about. And I think it also helps be a little geeky for forensics, because you're going to be having times where you're going to have to take apart an iPhone and replace the battery, or you're going to have to take apart a computer and figure out where's the hard drive and how to get this laptop hard drive out from this laptop. So it helps if you're geeky and like to put puzzles together and take them apart, because you're going to be doing that with all kinds of computers and laptops and everything you can think of.
Wow, you make it sound very exciting, actually. Like a
It
lot of
is.
fun, right? So I'm going to say thank you to everyone, and I want to open the floor at this point to questions. For our streaming audience, if you have a question, if you could please email it to the address on the homepage at deamuseum.org. We have a question reader in the audience who's ready to take those and feed them to our panelists. For those of you who are here with us in the auditorium, we have a person on each side who has a microphone, so if you could raise your hand, they will come to you. I'm going to ask you to please use the microphone, because even though we can probably hear you, we want to make sure that our streaming audience can hear you as well. So, any questions in the audience?
As a humanist, looking at science is always like, to me. But you all make it sound really fun, and I guess maybe it was my teachers in school that made it not fun. But my question for you all is math. What kind of math? Do you have to take math, and like I'm thinking in the science, is it more math that you need to do, or, I mean, because chemistry is math, right? And forensics are ones and zeros, so tell me what kind of math you had to take.
All right, I'll go first. For my math, personally, I think I took like calculus 1 and 2, and then the physics credits that I took were the calculus-based physics, and that math definitely carries over to the much higher level chemistry when you get to thermodynamic and quantum mechanics chemistry. There was a lot of math. When you actually see the USA Jobs posting for a chemist position, I think it lists a certain amount of credits of math and physics and chemistry, and I would just suggest that's the minimum requirement, so you should try to strive to do more than that to get enough knowledge.
I avoided math. When I looked for a major, I wanted a major that didn't involve any foreign language and didn't involve a whole lot of math. And business was the major for me. That said, you need to have an understanding of math, because you need to understand the different sizes for different hard drives, and you need to be able to understand where files will be located. So sometimes you'll need to be able to calculate where a file will be located on a hard drive, where a file will be located on a cell phone. And so an understanding of math is important for that. Fortunately for me, the computer programs we use have automated that process. So we don't have to do the manual calculations to determine the locations of various files.
Well, I have to say, I entered Michigan State as a biochemistry major, and I didn't do well in the calc-based physics. So, yeah, I backed out of that class real fast and said, hey, counselor, I don't know what I'm doing. That's really the whole backstory to that. But I did have Calc 3. That's what I had to end up with the forensic science degree. It did require Calc 3. So that's where I ended the calc-based anything. But it's the basis, right? Math's the basis, right? But it's the concepts of the chemistry and the science also is what the forensic science would have to be more so than the math.
Any other questions? There we go.
I have two. The first, I think you made mention of it earlier in the conversation. Talk a little bit more about what each of your three areas do to interact with not just DEA cases, but perhaps state and local law enforcement cases or other federal agencies, because I guess you all, sounds like you do an analysis of evidence for other people's cases as well. That's the first question, if you could start there.
Go ahead.
So we work cases, we're called to help with search warrants, both within the United States and outside of the United States. So we work with law enforcement in several different countries because DEA is not just the United States, it's all over the world. So I specialize in cell phone forensics, and also I do training with local law enforcement, but also do training with international law enforcement. So it's really great because not only do we go there and we do the imaging work, we'll image the cell phone forensics, but we will teach the law enforcement in those local regional offices outside of the country how they can do it, empower them to be able to move forward and conduct better examinations and get more information so that they can have better investigations and work more with DEA.
I'll say for the laboratory side, we're the drug laboratory for all the federal agencies, right? So we get DEA cases, but we'll also get FBI, ATF cases. When I'm actually analyzing the evidence, it doesn't really look that different to me. Maybe the packaging, they're all treated the same way. And as for the state and local, we generally don't do too many state and local cases in the laboratory. There may be some exceptions where we have certain capabilities where they may not. And then also for clandestine laboratories, there are times where our laboratory will assist a state or local laboratory with a clan lab, and we wouldn't take that evidence. They would analyze it, but we would be there for assistance.
And then for fingerprints, we obviously work for the DEA. Those exhibits are done, but we do ATF also. FBI usually gets separated and then sent back to the FBI so that their fingerprint specialists will process that for fingerprints. The state and the locals, again, like the state and the local, they usually work with their task force officers that work with DEA. So they're in the mix anyway, I guess, but we wouldn't normally go out and just work for the local people unless our agents are needing the assistance of us with them in order to make their cases.
Well, thank you so much for all the information that you mentioned. I have a PhD degree. I work and I have a knowledge in PCR, which is the polymerase chain reaction, conventional, nested conventional, and real-time PCR. When I will go to apply for the US jobs for the DEA or any other agents, there are some questions that I cannot pass. For instance, that it says yes or no. For instance, that selective service. Have you been registered for selective service? Well, when I came to the United States, I came after age 26. So no. So no, which means that I will never pass this. I cannot get the job. So how can you help me to go to the forensic science? Thank you.
So I would think that that's a technical question regarding the process of the USA Jobs application that would probably best be directed towards someone in the Human Resources or Recruiting section at DEA. And we can probably touch base afterwards, since you're here in person, to see what we can do to find the right people for that. Being a federal employee myself, and all of you all are too, we have all been through the gauntlet of USA Jobs, have we not? And I think there's some maybe general pieces of advice that we can pass on about the more job-specific parts of the application, aren't there?
Yeah. I would say usajobs.gov is a beast that you have to learn to conquer. And I'd say, like, in general, you have to, actually the job postings aren't actually posted for very long. Sometimes they're like a 2-week job posting. So what I try to tell people is to have your USA Job accounts ready. I think you can actually set up alerts on it when certain posts come up with keywords. And once it comes up, my main advice would be to read the job posting carefully and look at all those keywords and how your experience can apply to those. And at least with the forensic chemists, they hire a range for the grades. So just because you have a no for one answer, that may not be like a disqualifying question. That could just be based off of like what grade you would begin at. And my other tip would be, I know a lot of people kind of have their general resume and they submit it for any posting on USA Jobs, but I'd really emphasize tailoring your resume and your USA Jobs account to that one specific position and make sure that you at least address everything that it lists.
Like anything to add to how you can help yourself stand out in the application process?
Knowing what key buzzwords, if you have the educational background, that's great. If you don't, if you have certifications, that's also great.
Yes, and then uploading information too. Like for us, I know like if you have a certification, there's a document and it has to get uploaded. And I believe if you don't have that, if you think you did it and you didn't, it will kick you out, I believe.
So answer every question as completely as possible, attach everything that can be attached, push submit, and then cross your fingers.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Yeah. All right.
Sort of following up on the discussion of court, does any of the panel have sort of a favorite courtroom story they'd like to relate?
So my first court appearance was for a child pornography case. And so part of, I know when I sit up here, it does sound like a really interesting job, but we also come across rough content, especially working with cell phones. You see violent acts of terrorism, you see violent sexual acts, there is just the whole gamut. And my first case that I did was a child pornography case, which for a forensic examiner for digital is their least favorite thing to do. So, and it was my first court appearance, and I was very nervous about this. So I get to the courthouse, and I'm sitting outside the courthouse waiting, and literally from me to to him is the defendant's mother. And so we're sitting outside, and I'm like, oh, sorry about your son. And it was very awkward when it's your first court appearance. But you go, and that's the subject matter that you have to deal with, and you just have to be in the zone and be prepared. And we do a lot of mock trials with DEA in preparation so that you know that you try to make eye contact with the jury and you practice what you're going to say ahead of time so that it's understandable to a layperson.
I think we have time for one more question, if there are any more questions. Right.
You mentioned interfacing with special agents. Can you talk about whether any of your three specialties interface with diversion investigators or intelligence analysts in other parts of an investigation that you support?
Well, for fingerprints, yes, they do. So we do, especially diversion, because diversion had a couple of years of prescriptions false prescriptions, pseudo prescriptions. So they would submit all of the prescriptions that would be collected during their investigation. So we have worked with diversion closely. That has gone away a little bit. It's again shifted, so I'm not sure where it all goes, but the diversion and not the intel so much, just I guess that would be more of a chemistry item, but for the diversion, yes, for prescriptions.
I'd say most of the time the people that I interact with outside the laboratory are the agents and the prosecutors, but I haven't interacted with diversion. I've interacted with Intel one time. They called me and they said, hey, we saw in this report you identified this drug as a liquid. Is that right? And I said, yes. And they said, oh, we've never seen that before, just making sure it's not wrong, not a typo. And that was the only time I've got to interact with Intel. I'm sure they get the information from what we do, but for actually interacting with them, person to person, I know much.
So our lab works with both diversion and enforcement. So we work cases both from doctors' offices and clinics to cases that are more street level drugs, like you think of marijuana and spice and crack cocaine and opioids. So we work with both the diversion agents and with enforcement agents. We'll go through, we work hand in hand with them. We'll get an understanding of what they want. What are you looking for off this phone? Are you looking for pictures? Are you looking for databases? Are you looking to track where your overdose victim was the day before? And then we'll work to generate a report to show where the victim was the day before. Who is he calling? Who is he interacting with? So we work with Intel analysts and we work with Domex. We work with another agency for language translation purposes. So we work with a variety of different groups within DEA.
Well, I want to say thank you very much to our forensic science panelists. Can everyone applaud for them? I thought this was really wonderfully informative and kind of fun for me to learn all of these things, because it's fun every time to learn something new. We really appreciate that you came today to share your expertise with our audience here, with the audience online, and then with the video that's going to be archived later on. So trust me, a lot more people are going to see this down the line. Thank you to everyone who is here and who is watching. This will be available later on, and we hope that you can all come back for our next program in this series, Who We Are and What We Do here at DEA. Thank you.